There we go. We are live tonight. Hey, people. Welcome, everybody, for coming. You're listening to Restoring Republic, the voice of the people who's had enough of the corrupt judges, enough of the rogue cops, enough of the lawyers who twist the law, and the politicians who trample them. This is a show that dares to ask what happened to the de jure American government and how do we get it back. I'm your host, Sheriff Andrew Ike, on unincorporated Richland County, Ohio. And we're here every week to expose the lies and decode the legal traps that empower you to reclaim what's rightfully yours. No fluff, no compromise, just facts. Well, with me as always, Sheriff Adam Bonner on the unincorporated Summit County, Ohio. How's it going, Adam?
Excellent. How about you?
Good. Other than I think we're waiting for a big snowstorm, but we'll see what happens there.
Snowmageddon.
Hey, and tonight we have another special guest. You know, this woman is the unincorporated Ohio Assembly Court Clerk, Tessa Rockwell. How's it going, Tessa?
It's going great. Thanks for asking me to come tonight. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. Hey, for the audience out there, I heard that, Ohio, they did file their ex parte Milligan, didn't they?
Yeah. It was filed July 4th, 2024. So our courts are up and running.
What a date, July 4th. Freedom for us. Freedom. Well, that's great. So Ohio common law courts are up and running. We love that. So anyways, tonight, people, we are going to take a little deep dive, kind of like a story into the American legal system. We're going to have a fictional character named Michael going through the system, and we're going to let you know what it's all about. So sit back, relax, and listen up. Well, every system has a surface, the face that it shows the world, a mask. The American legal system is no different. Most people only ever see the mask, a judge's robe, the flags, the seal on the wall, or a solemn promise that justice is blind. But beneath the mask, beneath the marble floors and the polished wood, there's something else, something older, something colder, something moves like a tide. To understand what happened, our character Michael, and what happened to millions of others, we have to go somewhere that most people never realize exists. Not a place on a map, not a courtroom you can walk into, not law that you can read in a book. We have to go to the sea. Not a sea that you can swim in, not a sea with gulls or salt or wind. No, the jurisdictional sea.
Excellent. Yeah, this sea has a name, Special Maritime Territorial Jurisdiction. It's a mouthful for sure, but don't let the bureaucratic title fool you. This is no ordinary legal category. This is a doorway, the portal, through which the familiar world of rights and constitutions gives way to something very different. A world where contracts matter more than harm, commerce matters more than truth. An individual is quietly transformed into something less than human. A person, a vessel, a construct. In this world, you don't have to be a ship to be under maritime law. You don't have to be a sailor even. You don't have to be anywhere near water. You just have to be misidentified, not know who the hell you are, and misaddressed, misnamed, and misunderstood. And this happens quietly on forms you never read, no disclosure, systems you never see, and assumptions no one ever explains. And once it happens, once the system stops seeing you as a living man or woman and starts seeing you as a legal fiction, you're no longer standing on the land.
Yeah, it's scary because you're adrift. You're floating. You are subject to rules that you never agreed to in a jurisdiction you never entered. This is the sea that you can't see. A sea where the judge is not a judge in the way you think, where the courtroom is not a courtroom in the way you imagine, where the law is definitely not the law that you were taught in school. At least I wasn't taught in school.
Yeah.
It's a sea where the government doesn't interact with you, but the shadow version of you. And we'll explain that in a minute. A version created on paper, filed away in a system, tagged, and even if the theories are true, financially exploited. Most people never notice the shift. They walk in a courtroom, believe they're on solid ground. They walk out never realizing they were underwater the entire time. Michael didn't notice it either, not at first. but he felt it. He felt a pressure, a wrongness, a sense that the words being spoken were not meant for him, not the real him. He was right, because in this world, a wrongness, a pressure, he was right all the time. Because in this world, the world we're exploring, the moment that system calls your name, it isn't calling you anymore. It's calling the entity created in your name, the one tied to your birth certificate, the one tied to your social security number, the one tied to financial systems you've never heard of. In doing research for this project, I had to look up some of these things. I didn't know what the heck they were. I'm 59 years old.
We're right
It's
there with
called,
you, Tessa.
I know, it's crazy. I'm confused. It's calling the entity created in your name, the one tied to your birth certificate, social security number. I mean, how can someone else take who you are and put it somewhere else for something else? And once you answer, you say, yep, that's me. You're taken off the land and the sea takes you. This is where our investigation begins. Not with a crime, not with a conspiracy, but with a question. What if you walked into, isn't the courtroom you think it is?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people are starting to realize that, it's a name game. Names are supposed to be simple. A name is the first gift you're given, the first word spoken to you over your cradle, the first sound that belongs to you. But the world we're entering, the name is not a gift. It's a trap. Michael didn't know what he walked into in that courtroom. He didn't know that the name printed on the docket, and the name he carried his whole life wasn't really his, not in the way he thought. On the docket, it read Michael James Carter in all capital letters. Stark, cold, mechanical, a name stripped of humanity, a name that didn't breathe. But here's the twist. In this world, the name isn't a typo. It isn't a formatting choice. It's a clerical quirk. It's a designation, a signal, a code, a transformation. In this fictional investigation universe, the moment the name appears in all caps, something profound happens. You've been converted, shifted, reclassified. You're no longer a living man or woman. You're a legal entity, a construct created on paper, defined by statutes and governed by the rules that have nothing to do with flesh and blood. A person, a vessel, a thing. In the courtroom, the one you thought was built for people doesn't deal with people at all. It deals with persons, entities, instruments, units of commerce.
Man, that just blew my. It's always deja vu to me whenever I hear that.
Mm-hmm.
I've talked about it about a million times, but I hear it, and it surprises me every time. Anyhow, this is a name game. A game where the system calls out a name that looks like yours, sounds like yours, feels like yours, but isn't you. Have you ever heard them say, and when I mean you, converting you from the all lowercase u to the uppercase u? It really is a name game. So, it's calling the entity created in your name, the public usufruct name, the one tied to your birth certificate, the one tied to your social security number or numbers, the one tied to financial systems you've never seen. We'll get into that at a later time. The moment you answer, though, to that name, that's you, you just gave up joinder because you are not that thing. So, yes, that's me. You step into their world. That's it. You're cooked. It's going to take all types of stuff to get you out of it. You step into the sea. Michael didn't know any of this. He didn't know that the judge wasn't speaking to him. He didn't know that the attorney wasn't representing him. He didn't even know that the system wasn't interacting with him at all. It was interacting with the construct. The paper version, the commercial version, the version that exists in special maritime territorial jurisdiction, the sea beneath the land. So, and then the system is very careful about this. It never tells you the rules. There's never a full disclosure. It never explains the shift. It never warns you, that the name that you've used your entire life has a shadow, a twin, a silent double that walks into court in your place. So in this world, the name game is the first move. It's the opening gambit, the quiet sleight of hand that, transforms a man or woman into a vessel, a woman into a person, a life into a file, and once the game begins, everything else follows. Jurisdiction, perceived jurisdiction, perceived authority, perceived control, and perceived commerce, that there's some type of contract for you to perform. So because in this fictional universe, the courts don't operate on the land, they operate on the sea. And the sea doesn't recognize living people, it recognizes entities in commerce. And the entity is always named in all caps, and the entity is always pretty much what they go for, some variation of it: first, middle, last, first, last. This is the name game, it's the first step in the system that's hidden plain in sight. System that begins with a name and ends with the bond. I like that. But that part, the financial engine beneath the waves, their floodgates, is still ahead of us. And, when we get there, you'll understand why the name matters so much.
It's taken me quite a few years to wrap my head around this. And I'm still learning every day.
Yeah, I think though, Tessa, out there in social medias, it's starting to get around. The people are starting to pick it up. They're starting to get the information. Just got to keep reading. You can't watch everything on TikTok and Facebook. And if you do your due diligence. Look into it. Get the information.
Yeah, good point. So the presumption. Every system has a pressure point, a place where the weight of the whole structure rests. A single idea that holds everything together. In the world that we are exploring, that idea is presumption. It's not evidence. It's not fact. It's not the truth. It's presumption. Michael didn't know it, but the moment he stepped into that courtroom, a series of silent assumptions snapped into place around him like invisible restraints. Assumptions he never agreed to. Assumptions no one ever explained. Assumptions that transform the ground beneath his feet into something fluid, shifting, and unstable. In this fictional investigative universe, the system doesn't need your consent. It only needs your silence. Wow. I'm glad I'm mouthy. Sorry. Because silence here is interpreted as agreement. And agreement, even unspoken, is everything. So let's break it down. All right. The moment Michael walked through the courthouse door, the system presumed that he was acting as a commercial entity? Really? That he was engaged in commerce? No. He was subject to maritime rules. He had entered a contract. That's a scary thought.
Yeah.
And that he had voluntarily left the land. All this without a word spoken. This is quite genius, or it's quite horrifying of the system. It doesn't force you into its jurisdiction. It presumes you're already there. And unless you challenge that presumption, unless you know, and get this, you got to know the exact words, the exact moment, the exact mechanism, that presumption stands. Think of it like a tide. Okay, you're at the beach, you're at the ocean, you're enjoying your day. Inch by inch, when you're in that water, it drags you away from the shore, away from the land, away from the thoughts, rights you thought were yours, until suddenly you're in deep water. And we know another word for that. You're in deep shit. Oh, am I allowed to say that?
You yes, sure are. This is America the last time I checked.
Okay, thanks.
Right.
So you're in deep shit. And you don't remember how you got there. Well, that's what happened to Michael. He thought he was standing in a court of law, He thought he was protected by the Constitution. He thought the judge saw him, the man, the human being. But the judge didn't see him. The judge saw the entity. Scary word, the entity. The construct, the vessel, the commercial person created in his name. And the system presumed, without asking, that Michael agreed to play the role. In this world, presumption is more powerful than the truth. Really?
Statutorily.
You can say I'm a man. You can say I'm a woman. I have rights. I do not consent. But unless you know how to break the presumption, unless you know the exact legal pressure point, the system doesn't hear you. It isn't listening to you. It's listening to the entity. And the entity cannot speak. It can't object. It can't resist. It can only comply.
Yeah, that's scary. This is the heart of the name game. This is the engine beneath the sea jurisdiction. This is the mechanism that turns the courtroom into commercial arena. Presumption. What we were just talking about, the presumption that you are not who you think you are. The presumption that you are something else, something artificial, something that belongs to the sea. And the moment you answer to the name in all caps, the presumption becomes reality. Michael didn't know any of this. He didn't know the judge's first question, "Are you Michael James Carter?" in all caps was a formality. It was a trap. It was a test. It was a doorway. And when he said yes, the presumption locked into place. He was no longer standing on the land. He was standing on the deck of a ship, and he couldn't see. A ship he didn't know he'd boarded. A ship sailing under maritime rules. A ship that had no rights, only obligations. This is the presumption, the silent force that pulls people into the sea without them realizing they left the shore. And it's only the beginning, because once the system presumes you're a vessel, it can do something else. Something far more profitable. It can bond you.
And that they do. So the doorway, every system has a point of entry, a threshold, a moment where one world ends and another begins. And the world we are explaining and exploring, investigating, that moment is deceptively simple. You know, it's the moment someone calls your name. You know, Sheriff Andrew.
Yeah.
Is that your regular name, or do we take the sheriff away? What's that leave you with? You know, your first and your last name. Well, is it really uppercase, lowercase, or are they talking to the all caps version? So, you know, that's the type of stuff that goes on. And you don't know. You don't get full disclosure before you enter into these types of places. So it's at the moment someone calls your name. You step forward. Michael thought it was a routine, a formality, you know, a procedural step in the system he believed he understood. But in this fictional universe, that moment, that single call of a name is the doorway from land to sea. Some people believe that when you leave the gallery or, you know, the waiting area and you cross the bar, now the floodgates have opened and, you know, so anyhow, you know, the single call of the name is the doorway from the land to the sea, from rights to regulations, statutes, codes, from man to entity. And the system is very careful about this doorway. It doesn't force you through it. It doesn't drag you. It doesn't shove you. You know, it'll usually invite you some type of way, and there's usually some type of threat that goes with it, putting you under duress and coercion that if you don't perform, you know, you get a warrant, fines, jail time, all three. So all you have to do is answer, you know, just try to show up. You know, that was it. That's the moment the living man stepped aside and the entity stepped forward. So in this fictional investigative world, the courts don't interact with men and women. They interact with constructs, legal vessels created on paper, defined by statutes, and governed by maritime rules. And the doorway between the two is the name. Not the name that your mother whispered when she held you for the first time. Not the name your friends call you. You know, not my friends anyway. We all have unique names we call each other. So Anyhow, it's not the name that you sign when you write a letter. It's the other name, the shadow name, the name in all caps or the like, whatever variation. All caps, Michael James Carter. That name is not you. It's a vessel, a container, a commercial unit. When the judge calls it, he isn't calling the man, he's calling the vessel. So that's something to think about. I would get very creative when you get these things in the mail. Rebut it right away. Do your research. I'm not going to get too far into that. All right.
Yep. Because this is the doorway. A doorway built from paperwork, from assumption, from silence. A doorway that transforms the courtroom into a ship and the defendant into cargo. I don't want to be cargo. You guys want to be cargo?
No.
No, I don't want to be cargo. Michael didn't know any of this. He didn't know the moment he said yes, he wasn't confirming his identity, he was confirming his role. He was stepping in part to the system that had been written for him, the part of the entity, the part of the vessel. And once he stepped through that doorway, the rules changed. On the land, the man has rights. On the sea, the vessel has obligations. On the land, a man must be proven guilty. In the sea, a vessel must prove its innocence.
Yeah.
Sounds
On
familiar.
the land, the Constitution applies. On the sea, contracts rule. Not right, not correct, not the way that it's supposed to be at all. And the entity is always presumed to be in contract. This is a quite brilliance or quite cruelty of the system. It doesn't need your signature. It doesn't need your consent. It doesn't need your understanding. You know what it needs? It needs you to say, yeah, that's me.
Just show up, usually.
Yeah, because in this fictional world, the doorway isn't physical, it's linguistic, procedural, symbolic, and a single word opens it up. A single word closes it. And once you step through, you're no longer dealing with the law of the land, you're dealing with the law of the sea. Michael didn't see the doorway. Most people don't. Most people don't know this stuff. It doesn't look like a door. It looks like a question. Are you Michael James Carter?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, that's what they ask. But behind the question, behind the name, behind the presumption is a system waiting to do something else, something deeper, something more hidden, something more profitable. Because once the system has the entity, once the vessel is identified, and once the doorway is crossed, it can bond it. And that's where the real machinery begins.
How come you get all the awesome parts? Oh, man. So the hook, Sheriff Andrews talking about the hook here. Every system has a hook, a point where the invisible becomes unavoidable, a moment where the trap doesn't just close, it locks, it latches on. For Michael, that moment came, quietly. No alarms, no warnings, no dramatic shift in the room. Probably not even a change in tone of voice. Just a single sentence. Let the record reflect that the defendant has identified himself. That was it. The hook. You're screwed at that point. So the moment the system stopped pretending and started operating, and you'll notice there will be a shift. It's like everything just changes and feels evil. So, because in this fictional investigative world, the courtroom isn't just a place of judgment, it's a place of processing. It's a bank. So a place where the entity, the vessel, the commercial construct created in your name is not just recognized, it's activated. Michael didn't feel it. Most people don't. I don't expect people to pick up on this. It takes years to learn. But the moment he answered the name in all caps, the system took hold of him. Not the man, not the living being, the entity. And once the entity is engaged, the machinery beneath the courtroom begins to move, all that securities fraud. So this is the part no one sees, the part no one talks about, the part hidden between the wooden paneling and the flags and the solemn rituals, the part where the courtroom becomes something else entirely, a port, a processing station, a checkpoint between land and sea, a place where vessels are logged, recorded, and the theories, if the theories are true, financially leveraged. In this fictional universe, the hook is the moment the system confirms the entity exists, the entity is present, the entity is compliant, and the entity is on maritime jurisdiction. And I say nay to
Yeah,
all of
you've
that.
been hooked. You've been hooked at that point.
Oh, this is so scary. Okay, so once the confirmation is made, the entity becomes more, something valuable. And you're going to have to do your diligence and read. You're going to have to study this because it's crazy. Okay, in this world, the entity isn't just a legal fiction, it's an asset. Blew my mind. A unit of potential value. A vessel that can be bonded, can be tracked, and if the system chooses, monetized. Ugh. This is the hook. I'm sorry, but this freaks me out. The moment the system stops treating the entity as a defendant, it starts treating it as a financial instrument, a vessel with value, a vessel with a number, a vessel that can be entered into systems most people have never heard of. Okay, I looked this up. Systems like CRIS, which stands for the Court Registry Investment System, it's actually on the internet telling you what it does. And it's backwards, kind of like way, you know? Oh, this is a system that tracks securities, systems that operate beneath the surface of the legal world like deep currents. Michael didn't know any of this. He didn't know that the judge's simple acknowledgement, let the record reflect, wasn't just a procedural note. It was a signal to the machinery beneath the courtroom, a signal to the system behind the scenes, a signal that the entity was ready to be processed, ready to be bonded. This is the hook. The moment the sea takes hold, the moment the entity becomes part of a system that stretches far beyond the courtroom, a system built on names, on numbers, on silent agreements, on invisible mechanisms, a system that doesn't just judge, it profits. And the next step, the step Michael is about to discover, is where the machinery becomes unmistakable, where the sea reveals its financial engine, where the entity becomes a bond, and where the courtroom becomes a marketplace.
What a fucking marketplace, you say? This is getting
Yeah.
deep, people. Well, here's the conversion. Every system has a moment where it reveals its true purpose, not in words, not in laws, but in what it does when no one's looking. For Michael, the moment didn't happen in courtroom at all. It happened beneath it. Because the fictional investigative world we're talking about, the courtroom is only the surface, a stage, a facade. The real machinery, the real engine, sits below, hidden, silent, and waiting. And when the entity is acknowledged, when the name in all caps is activated, the engine begins to move. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, mechanically. This is the moment of conversion, the moment the entity stops being a defendant and becomes something else entirely, a unit of value. In this fictional universe, the system doesn't just record the entity, it processes it, and assigns it and categorizes it. It evaluates its potential and then quietly, automatically, it converts it into a financial instrument, a bond, a security, a piece of paper with value attached. Michael didn't feel this happening, and no one ever does.
Monetization without full disclosure or consent. So because the conversion doesn't happen in the courtroom, it happens in the system behind it, usually through, the banking staff, clerks, administrators, all that type of stuff. In the databases and the registries, in the automated process that hum beneath the surface like a mechanical heartbeat, here's how this works in the fictional world. Once the entity is acknowledged, the system generates a case number. But in this universe, a case number isn't just an identifier, it's a trigger, a switch, a signal, and a command, all in one. The moment the case number is created, the system begins building a financial profile around the entity. The charges, the potential fines, the projected duration that the case would last, the risk level being exposed, the expected outcome. All of it becomes data, and the data becomes value. This is a conversion. The moment the entity becomes a commodity in this fictional universe, the conversion is automatic. No judge orders it. No clerk initiates it. No attorney even knows it's happening.
Yeah.
It's built into the system, a silent algorithm, a hidden protocol that goes along with their secret oaths. It's a process designed not for justice, but for yield. And, securities fraud and unlawful conversion and monetization, it takes place more than people would realize. Sheriff's departments do it, courts do it, and none of them are FDIC insured, so they shouldn't be handling funds at all. They're not properly chartered.
I don't do it. Me as our court clerk, I don't do that. Anyway, so poor Michael, he had no idea the moment his case number was generated, a parallel file was created. It's a financial file, a shadow file. A file didn't track guilt or innocence, but value, projected value, potential value, extractable value. Because in this world, the entity isn't just processed, it's priced. This is the conversion. The moment the courtroom stops being a place of law, it becomes a node in a financial network. I didn't know what node meant, so I looked it up. And it means a point of connection.
There you go.
Point of connection.
Mm-hmm.
From an algorithm, from something. Trash. So it's a network that stretches far beyond the courthouse, into databases, into registries, into systems with names most people have never heard. Systems like CRIS, systems that track securities, systems that create cases not as conflict, but as assets. Michael didn't know it yet, but his case, so sad, his entity, his name in all caps, had just entered that network. And once it enters, it doesn't come out the same. Because the next step, the step the system is preparing for, is where the conversion becomes something even more tangible. Something with a number, something with a code, something with a value on the open market. The next step is CUSIP. And once again, I had to look it up. And it's on the internet. And once the entity receives a number, the C becomes a marketplace.
Absolutely. I mean, we don't tell people to go into their jurisdiction if they're in ours. We have our own courts and we handle our own matters pertaining to our American people. If you're acquiescing to the all caps names, that's on you. It's every man and woman's duty and due diligence to do their own research and to know who they are and to, execute, their offices and how they operate. We can only point you in the direction of that information and try helping get you there faster.
Yeah. Just put simple, we're in two different jurisdictions. We talk about this all the time. They're in the sea, we're on the land and soil. Where the men and women are at in the sea is where the contracts and maritime law is at. Pretty simple. Well, the number, every system that deals with value needs a way to track it, a way to label it, a way to identify it. In the world we're exploring, the identification doesn't come in the form of a name. It comes from a form of a number that doesn't describe a person, but a security, a number that doesn't represent a life, but a financial instrument, a number that doesn't belong to a man or woman, but an entity created in his name. This number has a name. It's the CUSIP number. In the fictional investigative universe, a CUSIP isn't just a code, it's a classification, a designation, a barcode for the entity. A way for the system to track the value extracted from the case, the charges, the projected fines, the potential yield. Michael had no idea about the moment his case was generated. The system began building a parallel profile, a financial profile, a shadow profile. The profile designed not to determine guilt or innocence, but determine value. Here's how it works in the fictional world. Once the entity is activated, once the conversion begins, the system assigns a CUSIP, like an identifier, to a case, not to the man, not to the human being or man or woman, to the entity, the vessel, the commercial construct, the thing created on paper. The number is the system's way of saying you are now inventory, you are now trackable, you are now part of the financial machinery, basically.
Man. Yeah, Michael didn't hear the beep. He didn't see the number. He didn't feel the shift, but the system did, because in this fictional universe, the CUSIP-like number is the moment the entity becomes the real to the machinery, not as a person, not as a defendant, not as a citizen, but as an asset.
I think Adam froze for a second. Tessa, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes.
Tessa, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. I think Adam's frozen.
You see me?
Yes.
Yeah, now we can.
All three of the pictures went black for a second. It's been doing that a lot lately.
You're back.
Well,
go for it.
So
look at what we're talking about.
Yeah. So this is the part that makes the air go thin. The moment the entity receives a number, it becomes part of the network. A network of registries, a network of databases, a network of financial systems humming beneath the surface of the legal world. Systems that don't care about justice, they don't give a shit. Systems that don't care about truth, they really don't. Systems that only care about value, what they can monetize and what they can profit off of. Because in this world, the entity isn't just processed, it's cataloged. This is the number. The moment the entity becomes the part of the system that stretches far beyond the courtroom, a system that connects the case, the charges, the projected fines, the financial yield, the entity's commercial identity, all through a single code, a code that functions like a CUSIP, code that marks the entity as inventory, code that allows the system to track it, trade it, profit from it. Michael didn't know it yet, but his entity, his shadow identity, now had a number. And once the number exists, the system can do something even more profound, something deeper, something more automated, something that ties the entity to a network of financial accounts. The next step is AutoTris. Yeah. And once the system begins linking numbers to accounts, the C becomes a grid where every entity is mapped, every case is logged, every bond is tracked, and every man or woman who answers to that name in all caps becomes part of the network.
Go figure. Go figure.
Okay. You guys are killing me heart. All right. I'm sorry. I don't want to see all these innocent people turning into an asset.
You're an honest court clerk. Article 3 on the land and soil. You have nothing to worry about.
It's so sad. Okay, so the grid. Every system that grows large enough eventually becomes automated. Not because automation is efficient, but because it's silent, indivisible, unquestioned, unstoppable. In the world we're exploring, the automation has a name whispered only in the deep. See, I'm so flustered I can't read.
Woosah, slow down.
Okay. Whispered only in the deepest corners of the conspiracy. A name that sounds clinical, technical, harmless. Auditress. Michael had no idea that such a system existed. Most people don't. Me as one. Because auditress isn't a courtroom process. It isn't a legal doctrine. It isn't something you can point to in a statute book. It's a network. It's a grid. It's a silent architecture humming beneath the surface of the legal world. At a system designed to do one thing: to link the entity to the number, link the number to the account, link the account to the value automatically, instantly, without any human intervention. This is the moment where the fictional world we're exploring stops feeling like a courtroom drama and starts feeling like a machine. A machine that doesn't sleep, doesn't pause, doesn't question. A machine that processes identities the way a factory processes raw materials.
Yep.
Crazy.
So add me to a piece of leather so you can build a shoe out of me. Sorry.
Well, here's how it works in this fictional universe. Once the entity receives its number, once the QIP-like identifier is assigned, Auditress activates. Not with the judge's order, not with the clerk's signature, not with human decision, with the trigger. The digital signal, a data point, and a case file entering the system. And once the trigger fires, Auditress begins linking everything together. It links the entire case. It links the entity to the case to the number to the financial profile, the financial profile to the registry, and the registry to a bond. All of it automatic, all of it silent, all of it invisible. And this is the grid that we're talking about. A web of connections that turns the entity into a node, a point of data, a unit of value, a vessel floating not on water, but on information. Michael didn't see the grid. No one ever does, because Auditress doesn't operate in the courtroom. It operates in the background, in the servers, in the databases, in the automated systems that hum beneath the surface like a digital tide, a tide that pulls every entity into its current.
Yeah, this is just a fictional story that we put together to pull together, the information we're sharing. So it's not a case that you're going to find out there. However, there probably are a ton of Michaels that are jammed up in the system. So this is the part that makes the conspiracy feel like a theory, more like a structure, because in this fictional world, Auditress doesn't just track the entity, it manages it. And I'll be damned if they do. They're in everything. Credit cards, all your banking. I mean, think of God's eye. It sees everything that you're doing. It's attached to you, tracking you. So, it's, something even more profound, something deeper, something more lucrative. It prepares the entity for scrutinization or securitization, rather. This is the grid. The moment the fictional legal world reveals its true nature, not a system of justice, not a system of rights, not a system of law, a system of value extraction, because you are the creditors. So a system where every entity is a data point, every case is a transaction, every judgment is a financial event, and I'll say a taxable event, if I may. And the next step, the step Auditress prepares the entity for, is where the machinery becomes unmistakable, where the entity becomes a bond, where the bond becomes an asset, where the asset enters the CRIS system, to pay those criminals, and the system doesn't just track value, but invests it, compounding interest daily. So this exists to serve a single central objective. In the world we're exploring, that objective is not justice, it's not fairness, it's not truth, it's yield. Michael didn't know it, but the moment his entity entered into the grid, the moment Auditress linked his number, his case, his financial profile, the system began doing something else, something deeper, something more deliberate, because it is deliberate, something that reveals the true nature of the fictional world beneath the courtroom. It begins feeding his entity into the engine. The engine isn't a machine in the traditional sense. It isn't made of gears and pistons or levers. It's made of processors, protocols, financial algorithms that operate within the cold precision of a machine and the hunger of a living organism, an organism that consumes cases and produces value. Here's how it works in the fictional universe. Once the entity is cataloged, once the number is assigned, once AutoTrist links everything together, the engine begins calculating not guilt, not innocence, value, projected value, projected compounding interest, for whatever amount they make you surety for, and extractable values. It analyzes the charges, it evaluates the risk, it eliminates the fines, it predicts the outcome, and then quietly and automatically it assigns the entity a financial rating, a rating that determines how the entity will be handled and how it will be processed and how it will be leveraged. So because in this world, the entity isn't just a defendant, it's a bond, that's pretty much what we're talking about,
Yeah.
Not just an entity, you basically are something that become monetized. Not
Well, I'll tell you what, I think people are going to start realizing a lot of these different systems are all tying together. We all know what's going on in these courts, these foreign sea jurisdiction courts. We know what's happening. We're gathering the evidence. It's coming. We're gathering the evidence. It is coming. Mm-hmm. But all these other, the stock market, the healthcare industry, the same shit's happening. If you think just these little healthcare, all this fraud in healthcare in Minnesota and Ohio, you think that's something? It's just the tip of the iceberg, people. This shit's just about done. I'm telling you. Anyways, a bond with value is a bond with yield. A bond can be entered into the system designated to manage financial instruments. Systems like CRIS, this is the engine, the system that turns cases into commodities, entities into assets, courtrooms into ports, and the justice into financial event. System where every case is a transaction, every judgment is a ledger entry, every sentence is a calculation. Michael didn't know it yet, but his entity, his shadow identity, had just been rated, filed, indexed, and prepared for entry into the next phase of the system. A phase where the entity becomes a part of financial pool, a pool that generates interest, a pool that grows with every case, a pool that feeds the engine, a pool called CRIS. This is the engine. The moment the fictional legal world reveals its motive, not justice, not order, not law, profit. A system designed not to judge, but to generate. A system where the sea isn't water, but capital. And the next step, the step Michael is about to discover, is where the engine becomes unmistakable, where the entity enters CRIS, where the bonds become an investment, and where the courtroom becomes a financial institution. Because once the entity enters CRIS, the sea becomes a bank.
Hot damn. The vault. Every conspiracy has a center, a core, place where all the threads converge. In the world we're exploring, the place isn't a courtroom. It isn't a judge's chambers. It isn't a government office. It's a vault, a digital vault, a financial vault, a vault with a name that sounds harmless until you understand what it does. The CRIS is what we're talking about here. Michael had never heard of the CRIS system. Most people haven't, because CRIS isn't part of the public face of the legal system. They don't even want to acknowledge it when you bring it up. So it isn't mentioned in court. It isn't explained to defendants. You get no disclosure. It isn't taught to us in school. Public education doesn't want to tell you what's going on. So the system is designed not to judge, but to hold funds, to hold securities, to monetize, to bond, to hold financial instruments created by the engine. And in this fictional investigative universe, Chris doesn't just hold value, it grows it, compounding interest daily. Talk about putting the shaft to the American people. I'd be
Shit,
pissed off
all these bonds are being traded on the market, people. We all know this.
I'd
It's
be
not a
pissed off
mystery
to be
anymore.
treated that way as a U.S. citizen. That would
It
piss
is
me
not a mystery.
Yeah. So anyhow, here's how it works in this world. Once the entity is converted, once the number is assigned, the Autotris links everything together. Once the engine calculates the value, the entity is fed into Chris, not to the man, not the human being, not the entity, the vessel. The commercial construct or public usufruct, whichever you prefer, financial instruments created in his name. We're talking about Michael here. So Chris receives the bond. Chris logs the bond. This is on the private side of the ledgering. Chris pulls the bond with thousands of others. Chris invests the pull automatically, silently, relentlessly. And that's kind of the name of their game.
So this is the vault, a system that treats cases as deposits, entities as securities, judgments as triggers, sentences as yield curves. A system where the courtroom is merely the front office and Chris is in the back end engine. Michael didn't know it, but the moment his entity entered Chris, it became part of a financial ecosystem, a system that tracks the bond, invests the bond, grows the bond, and profits from the bond. It's all about the bond. All without the man ever knowing the bond exists. This is the part that makes the fictional world feel less than like a legal system, and more like a financial organism. Because Chris doesn't care about guilt or innocence. Chris doesn't care about justice or fairness. Chris doesn't care about the man at all. Chris cares about flow. Flow of cases, flow of bonds, and the flow of value. This is the vault. The moment the entity stops being a theatrical construct, excuse me, not theatrical,
Theoretical.
theoretical. Thank you. Woo! And becomes a financial asset, a unit of value, a point of yield, a piece of a portfolio. Oh my gosh. A portfolio built not from stocks and bonds, but from people?
Chattel
Or
slave.
rather, I kind of feel dirty. Like I want to
It
take a
makes-
shower.
It does make you feel dirty.
Yeah. It's from the entities created in their names. Because in this world, the sea doesn't take you, it banks you.
It sure does. Michael didn't know it yet, but his entity, the shadow identity, was now locked inside the Chris system, filed, indexed, and invested. And once the entity enters Chris, the system can do something even more profound, something that reaches beyond the courtroom, beyond the grid, beyond the vault. The next step is where the fictional world reveals its deepest secret, the difference between the law of the land and the law of the sea. Once you understand that difference, you'll understand everything.
Right. So that's kind of where you get into the divide. We talk about it all the time. Every world has a border, a line that separates one reality or one jurisdiction from another, a boundary that most people never see because they were never meant to see it. In the world we're exploring, that boundary is not a wall, it's not a fence, it's not a line on a map, it's a jurisdiction, a split, a fracture, a divide between a lawful and legal worlds that coexist in the same physical space, but operate under entirely different rules. This is the divide between law of the land and law of the sea. Michael didn't know it, but the moment he answered to the name in all caps, he crossed that divide. He was going towards getting unlawfully joindered with them. So he left the land, the world of rights, constitutions, and living men and women, and entered into the sea, the world of contracts, commerce, and entities. A world where a courtroom is not a place of justice, but a port. A world where the judge is not a judge, but a captain. or administrator. World where the defendant is not a person but a vessel. This is the part that makes the fictional world feel like a labyrinth. Beneath the divide is invisible. It isn't marked, it isn't announced, it isn't explained with full disclosure. It's assumed.
So here's how it works in this universe. On the land, the law recognizes men and women, natural rights, constitutional protections, harm, injury, and due process.
Mhm.
On the sea, the law recognizes entities, contracts, commercial obligations, maritime rules. There's two worlds,
Mhm.
two systems, and two realities. In the courtroom, the one that Michael walked into operates on the sea. So this is a twist. The courtroom looks like land, it feels like land, it pretends to be land, but legally and in this fictional world, it's not. It's a ship, it's a vessel. It's floating jurisdiction anchored not to the soil, but to authority. Michael didn't hear the groan. He didn't feel the shift. He didn't see the boundary. But the moment he answered to the entity's name, he crossed it. He stepped off the land, stepped into the sea. He stepped into a world where the rules are different and the consequences are financial. That is the divide.
Yes, it is. It's the reason the entity exists. The
Right?
reason the numbers exist, the reason Autotrist exists, the reason Chris exists. Because the sea's not a metaphor, not in this world. It's a jurisdictional ocean, a legal realm where everything is commerce and everyone is a vessel, and vessels can be bonded. This is the moment the fictional world reveals its architecture, a world built on two layers: the land where men and women live, that's us, and the sea where entities are processed. That's these three jurisdiction courts we're talking about. And the courtroom sits on the seam between them, a seam that looks solid but is anything but. Michael didn't know it yet, but understanding the divide is the key to understanding everything that comes next. Because once you know the difference between land and the sea, you begin to see the system for what it truly is: a machine, a network, a structure built on presumptions, automation, and financial extraction. And the next step, the step Michael is about to face, is where the divide becomes personal. Because where the system doesn't just process the entity, but it claims it. Because the next chapter is where the fictional world reveals the final piece of the puzzle: why the system needs the entity, and why the gains by keeping the man asleep, and what it gains by it, you know?
Right.
Keep them
So,
asleep.
yeah, they want to keep everybody indoctrinated and asleep and entertained. If you can keep a coliseum full of people, and food in their belly and enough drink to flow around, they're not going to pay attention to what's going on underneath the coliseum, right? So that's typical politicking for you. It's been going on for thousands of years. It's biblical. So the claim: every system, no matter how vast, how automated, how impersonal, eventually reaches a point where it must touch the individual. Not the entity, not the number, not the bond, the man. This is where this joinder comes into place. So in the world we're exploring, the moment is called the claim. Michael didn't know it yet, but the machinery beneath the courtroom, the grid, the engine, the vault, had finished its work. The entity was processed, a number was assigned, the bond was created, the value was calculated, and the vault had taken it in. The system had everything it needed, except one thing: the man's compliance. This is where the fictional world becomes dangerous, because the system doesn't just want the entity, it wants the man to validate the entity, to acknowledge it, to stand in for it, to merge with it, to joinder. The moment the system tries to bind the man to the vessel, the living being, man or woman, warrior progeny, to the legal fiction, the man or woman to the bond. Do you understand the charges against you? Michael hesitated. Not because he didn't understand the words, but because something felt wrong. Your intuition should be humming right now. Red flag, you know? So the question wasn't a question, you know, it was a contract, you know, a doorway, a binding, a claim. You know, this is where they get you to acquiesce into further, you know, debtor's obligations and contract, ultimately, through acquiescence and tacit agreement. So,
In this fictional universe, the system needs the man to agree, not to the facts, not to the charges, but to the role of the entity, the role of the vessel, the role of the financial instrument created in his name. Because without that agreement, without that moment of consent, the system cannot fully merge the two. And without the merge, the bond is incomplete. Michael felt it, a pressure, a weight, a sense that the room is leaning toward him, waiting for him, expecting him. The judge's eyes, the prosecutor's silence, the clerk's pen hovering above the page, all of them waiting for one thing. They were waiting for Michael's yes. Because in this world, the claim is not about guilt, it's not about truth, it's not about justice, it's about ownership. A system wants the man to claim the entity, so the system can claim the man. Because once the man claims the entity claims the man. This is the claim.
Yeah, that's the joinder. That's what they've been. It's what they're guilty of doing. Every case, every man or woman that walks into that C jurisdiction court, that's what's going on every single time.
right.
And the moment the fictional legal world stops being abstract and becomes personal, the moment the machinery reaches through the paperwork, through the numbers, through the automation, and touches the human being, the moment the system says you are responsible for the vessel, you're liable for the bond, you are the guarantor of the entity. Michael didn't answer, not yet, but the room was waiting, the system was waiting, the sea was waiting. In the next chapter, the next moment is where everything changes, because the next step is where Michael finally sees the system for what it is. Not a courtroom, not a process, not a mistake, a claim of ownership. And once he sees that, he has a choice that will determine whether he remains a man or becomes the entity forever.
Damn it. Yeah, just the crossroads. So every system, no matter how vast, you know, how hidden, how automated, eventually reaches a moment where it needs something only a man or a woman can provide, a choice, right? You need to get those agreements, right? You need to get them recorded on the record so you can confirm, you know, that there's an agreement, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, a single decision that determines whether the machinery continues or collapses. And the world we're exploring, that moment is now. Michael stood there, suspended between two worlds, between him, the land, the world of men and women, of breath and bone, of rights he never knew he had. Before him, the sea, you know, the world of entities, numbers, bonds, a silent machinery humming beneath the courtroom floor. And between them, a question. Do you understand the charges against you? It wasn't a question, it was a contract. This is where acquiescence comes into play, a binding, a joindering. This is the doorway the system needed him to walk through, because in this fictional universe, the system cannot fully claim the man until the man claims the entity. Don't do it, people. Don't do it. Do not do it. And that claim requires one thing, his agreement. I'll be damned.
Imagine that. So Michael felt the pressure, not physical, but psychological. A weight pressing down on him from every direction. The judge's eyes, the prosecutor's stillness, the clerk's anticipation, all of them waiting on the same thing, for him to say yes. Because in this world, the crossroads is not a dramatic moment. It's subtle, quiet, deceptively simple. A single word, a single nod, a single acknowledgement. And once it's given, the man and the entity become one. The system needs that merge. It depends on it. Without it, the bond is incomplete. The value is unstable. The machinery cannot finalize the claim. So it just waits. It's patient. It's silent. It's
You're damn right
predatory.
they're patient.
Yeah.
Yep.
Michael's mind raced. He didn't understand the charges, not really. Not in the way the judge meant. He understood the words, but he didn't understand the implication. Because in this fictional world, do you understand doesn't mean do you comprehend? It means do you stand under this jurisdiction? Do you accept the role of the entity?
There you go.
Do you submit to the sea?
I'll be damned.
Woo!
The truth.
Well, that was
will
literally
set
a
you free.
question.
It finally comes out. Do you submit to the sea? The truth is finally revealed. Well, anyways, this was the crossroads, 2 paths, 2 futures, 2 identities. If he said yes, the system would close down around him like a fist. The entity would become him. The bond would attach to his living being. The machinery would finalize the claim. And if he said no, the system would falter. The machinery would stutter. The claim would weaken. And the man, the living man, would remain separate from the entity. This was the moment the system feared, the moment that the man might wake up. Michael opened his mouth. The judge leaned forward and the clerk's pen trembled. The prosecutor's eyes narrowed in the entire room. The entire system held its breath, waiting for the word that would determine everything. This is the crossroads, the moment where a fictional world stops being a conspiracy and becomes a choice between land and sea, between a man and entity, between autonomy and ownership. In the next chapter, the next breath is where Michael made that choice. The choice will determine whether he remains a man or becomes a vessel forever. So that's the choice that we all have when we step into them sea jurisdiction courts. Well,
Man,
I wanted to thank everybody for sticking around for that. I hope they enjoyed Michael's little trip. There's a lot of facts that dropped there.
Mm-hmm.
But you know what we're trying to do is, as the state's assembly, as the Americans that hold a lawful right over everything in this country, and have the highest superior authority, we're, restoring our court system, the common law court. That's what we're doing. Why we've been talking forever on these videos for you guys to change your political statuses back to American, join your assemblies, help out, get your courts up and running, because we can restore the republic. We can restore this country. And that's what we're doing. We're not going to stop until it's happening.
hallelujah. Pass the ammunition.
Yeah. So anyway, I wanted to thank everybody, like I said, for sticking around. I hope you got something out of it. I do want to remind you, we do have a donation here. If anybody would like to donate to the channel, it's on Cash App. It's $APC 140. If anybody would like to donate, it'd be great. If not, it's all right. We're here for you. We're going to work this out for you. Tessa, I wanted to thank you for stopping by. It's been great. It's glad that the nation gets to finally see one of the court clerks out here,
Awesome having you, Tessa.
Hey, thanks
And
for
Adam,
having me,
as
guys.
always, thank you. And we want
Come
you
back
guys
again.
to keep checking out pktfnews.org, claimyourinheritance.info, and standup.land. We're here for you. We're back. We restored it. I guess that's it. I guess we'll see everybody later. Thanks for sticking around.
Thank you,
Catch
guys.
on the next one.
We'll try to get to the questions as soon as we can. It'll probably be tonight or tomorrow, but thanks everybody that talked in the chat and stuff. I've seen some of your guys' comments if we were really real. Yeah, we're real. It's live.
It is live.
Thanks a lot. All right, we'll see you guys later. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll get into it next time.